Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm redrawing my husband's art. Recently, when I've been brainstorming video ideas, my husband has been offering to do another video of me redrawing pictures that he drew. So this week I decided to take him up on his offer. I do want to clarify that my husband rarely draws, but he enjoys helping me make videos and likes seeing what I'm able to do with the concepts that he gives me. And this time he definitely challenged me. The first time we did this, we used color pencils. However, this time we're going to be using alcohol-based markers. So I dug out my huge set of Ohuhu markers from my closet and started to make groups of colors. I wanted to have a nice selection of colors that worked well together, and I didn't want to overwhelm him. However, I did also let him have access to all the colors if he wanted a color I did not include in the selection. Like last time, I didn't want to make Josh more nervous or put pressure on him, so I didn't film the process. But here's how his first drawing turned out. He calls it the Droplet, and it is a water guy that honestly looks a bit like Wade from Elemental. But my husband said he forgot that Wade existed while drawing this, and he didn't remember about Wade until he was done. Anyways, let's see how I can recreate this piece in my style. To start, I kind of just wanted to redraw the character in a way that is very faithful to the original. This helped me kind of get a better feel for the character and how I would go about drawing it. The main features are the droplet-like flow of his head, and a feature my husband pointed out being the cloud nose. I wasn't totally sure how I would handle the cloud nose, and I was actually a bit nervous about it. However, once I had sketched out this more true to the original version, I decided to start sketching something that is closer to how I usually draw characters. For the nose, I decided to draw it in a way that I call my more defined nose shape. I use this shape when drawing characters with more prominent noses, but with this character, I'm going to make it a bit more round to kind of imitate a cloud. The character Josh drew has light eyelashes, and I wanted to keep this trait, so I'm outlining the eyelash shapes instead of filling them in like I usually do. The vibe of this character felt kind of chill, so I decided to go with a softer eye shape for Droplet. I've decided I'm going to refer to him as Droplet. Josh gave Droplet teardrop-shaped irises. I instead decided to make the eye drop shape be the shape of the pupil, within the usual iris shape that I draw. Also, it's really hard to say iris shape. I keep wanting to say Irish shape. Since this character has a cloud nose, I thought I would add cloud eyebrows for balance, and I'll also make the ears be clouds later on. To help Droplet keep the water drop-like shape, I'm going to draw his hair, or what looks like hair, in a whooshy water drop kind of shape. And for fun, I add a little floating drop at the end. I don't know, I just felt like it was kind of a fun detail. For the body, I wanted to make it so we can kind of see the shirt through the neck. So I fully sketched out the shirt wrapping around his neck. This won't be as prominent once we add the coloring. After the rough sketch, I did the cleanup sketch. I printed that out, and I'll use my light pad to transfer my sketch to marker paper. Now, technically I could have done line art on the computer and printed that out onto my marker paper, but I find that I often get a result I like more when I do the line art alongside the traditional coloring. I find it often looks softer and more natural. And now that my sketch is transferred to the marker paper, I can now begin coloring. I was actually quite nervous to color this picture. The first reason is that I haven't used alcohol-based markers in a good while. The second reason is that this character is made of water, so the way I need to shade it was pretty different. I am starting by applying the lightest color I'm going to use, being this kind of light teal blue. I'm going to fade and blend this out using the colorless blender. The blender basically has no color to it, so I'm able to blend out this color into the white of the paper to help it have a smoother transition. I do this technique for the nose and ears as well. For the lips, I just filled them in with the lighter color. Josh drew Droplet with a lighter mouth, so I wanted to try to keep the lips a lighter color. For the face, I start by outlining it with the light teal, and I'm going to blend this lighter color in with the blue that I use for the face by switching back and forth between the two colors. As I'm coloring, I'm trying my best to really saturate the paper with the ink. This helps to limit the appearance of edges and streakiness. When coloring in this way, you really have to take your time and allow the ink to soak into the paper. If you go back and forth really fast and don't really allow the ink to seep into the paper, you kind of end up with a more streaky texture. Also, my version of Droplet is more on the teal side. I had intended to add a decent amount of a blue that was closer to the color that Josh used, but I ended up mostly using the teal base and only used the more blue color in the shadow spots. like here around the eyelids. For this piece, I was trying my best to not shy away from blending colors. I wanted to push myself to use a good amount of colors and to also blend them. Since this character is made of water, this is a great piece to practice my blending. My husband seemed a bit apprehensive to use the alcohol-based markers since they are very new to him. He kept suggesting using Crayola markers instead, but I don't have much for Crayola markers, so we were going to use my more fancy markers. However, once he started to color with the markers, I could tell he was having a lot of fun, and he expressed that he actually really liked using them. He had a big smile on his face as he was coloring, and to be honest, it was really cute. I enjoyed watching him create the art, especially since he seemed to be having fun. He also expressed that he was going to try to challenge me this time around with the characters, and they are very out of my comfort zone for sure. For the hair, I did a very similar process to the skin. However, I found it to be a bit easier to shade since I was shading smaller sections and defining more simple forms. Also, to help the hair feel more like hair, I allowed the edge of where the skin meets the hairline, so to speak, to not be blended out. And I also added darker shading around it. When you think of water, you often think of it as just being clear. However, when you look at pictures of water droplets or like a water splash, there is a lot of contrast in the shadows and highlights. So for my coloring, I try to add a good amount of contrast. I will also add some harder edged highlights with a paint marker later in the process. This will kind of help push the shiny feeling. Before working on the piece, I spent a good amount of time studying pictures of water, as well as characters like Wade from Elemental, to help me figure out how I should render the picture to make it look watery. Something that I thought would help push the idea is having the back part of the shirt be seeable through the neck. So I laid down a light yellow first, and then I'll go over this with the blue for the neck. My hope is that it will make it look like the neck is a bit transparent. And I do have to say, I am happy with the result. The yellow did blend out a little bit more than I would like, but I think it still gets the feeling across. Also, for some reason, I really like how the shading on the neck turned out. It just seems really nice to me for some reason. I feel like the water texture or feeling really comes through here nicely. Next was filling in the shirt with yellow. This part was pretty boring, so we'll speed through it. It was kind of funny because as my husband was adding the yellow shirt to Droplet, I was thinking, oh no, it kind of looks like Wade, and Wade also wears yellow. But I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to discourage Josh. But yeah, when he finished the picture, he stopped and looked at it and said, "Does this look like that one water character from that one movie?" I told him it did remind me of the character, but it also looks very different, and Wade doesn't have a cloud nose. So yeah. So like I said earlier, I will be keeping the eyelashes lighter in color. I don't keep them as light as Josh had them because I still wanted the eyes to stand out, but they are much lighter than how I usually color them. I usually use black, dark brown, or a very dark variant of whatever the eye color is. I do sometimes do very light eyelashes, but it's not super common. I have a few characters with lighter eyelashes, like Finley and Silva. Josh used a very deep blue for the irises, so I'm going to get very dark with the shading. I go in with very dark blues, and I work my way to a lighter color for the lower part of the iris. When coloring eyes, I always get very nervous when coloring around the highlight. I want to keep the highlight in each eye a similar shape and size, and also not ruin them. If I do mess up, sometimes I can fix it with paint or a white gel pen, but it often just doesn't feel as nice as when I'm able to keep the highlight area nice and clean with little mistakes. So I was trying to be very, very careful. Lastly was the finishing touches. I added the white highlights to the hair with my Artex acrylic paint marker. I then added the line art with a variety of color pencils. The color I used depended on what I was outlining. It is a lot more work to keep switching colors, but I love the softer look that this gives the art, while still helping define the details and tighten things up, so I feel like it's worth it. Lastly, I wanted to make the background a bit more interesting, so I grabbed out my circle ruler and used a color pencil to lightly make a circle around the character. Then I filled it in with a very light pink. The pink is a bit random, but I felt like it would complement the other colors nicely. And with all of that, this picture is now done. Like I said, I was very nervous about drawing Droplet and his features, but he turned out better than I was anticipating, so yay! We'll have my husband react to this piece later, but for now I'll be redrawing the second picture he made. He calls this one the Queen, and she is a bug character. Once again, I was kind of nervous to redraw this in my style. I don't usually work with bug-like characters, but it will be very interesting. Like I did with Droplet, I'm going to start by drawing a sketch that is more faithful to the original to help me feel things out. Something I kept wrestling with is how bug-like or how human-like do I want to make this character. For my second sketch, I was staying closer to bug, but allowing myself to veer away a bit from the original. And this was feeling okay, but I wasn't loving it. It didn't feel true enough to my drawing style. So for this third attempt, I drew the proportions more how I usually do, but I tried to still include the bug details. For the eyes to make them feel bug-like, I'm not going to draw an iris. Instead, the entire eye will be filled with the kind of pattern that Josh drew. For the nose, I wanted to keep the slick kind of styled nose that Josh drew, since I do feel like it helps things feel more bug-like. I'm also making sure to include the lips. They are a very prominent feature of the Queen, so I had to make sure to include them. For the antenna, I drew them in a very similar fashion, but I kind of break them up into sections to make them feel more detailed. Josh didn't add hair to his drawing, so I didn't want to add hair to mine, but I also didn't want the top of the head to feel too simple or empty, so I decided to draw a grid-like pattern around the top of the head, and it extends down to her nose. My idea is that maybe this is a kind of shell or exoskeleton that wraps around the upper half of her head. The Queen has a very long neck, so I drew this character with a longer neck than usual. However, we will be able to see the torso in my drawing, so I decided to draw in the shoulders, and I had to give her an outfit, so I went with something kind of based on a kimono. I don't know, it kind of just seemed to fit her character. Oh, and at the last moment, I decided to add some ears. I kept debating on the ears, but I felt like it would help the character feel more human-like, and it also just helps the head feel more normal to me. Once I had my concept in place, I did the cleanup sketch, printed that out, and traced it onto a new piece of paper. So I thought this picture would have much less blending than the last one since this character isn't made of water, but I was very wrong. There was a lot of blending involved. To make the coloring pop, I'm going to apply a light yellow to the outer rim of the face, and I will blend this color into the green base color that I plan to use for all of the lower part of the face. This part was pretty simple since there wasn't a ton of form to define in this area. I was kind of just blending the colors together. Like I mentioned before, I make sure to soak the paper with the ink as I'm coloring to minimize streaks in the coloring and hard edges. Markers can behave very differently depending on the paper you use, so if you find you're having a hard time laying down flat layers of color or are having a really hard time blending colors, I recommend testing out different paper. For pieces that rely mostly on marker, I recommend paper that is smooth and has very little tooth to it. Something like a smooth cardstock often works well. The paper I use is Nina Index cardstock. It's kind of just a basic cardstock, but you can get like 300 sheets for like $13. So it's pretty inexpensive, and I always really like how the markers perform on this paper. If I'm doing more of a mixed media piece, like I know I want to rely on color pencils a bit more, I will use mixed media paper. However, it can sometimes be a bit harder to get smooth flat colors and harder to blend colors since the ink soaks into the paper much more quickly, but still very much workable a lot of times. So yeah, your paper type can really change how the markers perform, so I recommend testing out different papers. As you can see for the exoskeleton or shell part of the head, I am shading each part with a variety of greens. This part was actually very complicated because I was switching in between like 5 different greens, and I was trying so hard to not get them confused. I did confuse them a few different times, but I was always able to fix the mistake if I blended things enough. I felt like I had caps everywhere and I was holding multiple markers in each hand, and it felt very chaotic. I wanted to shade each of the sections so that it felt like it had a bit more of a texture and form to it, and I feel like it succeeded at giving this effect. It was really interesting drawing human-like characters that were a different material. I don't know if that's the right word for this, but like I got to work with water, and for this one I was trying to make the skin feel more bug-like, so I got to render things in a different way than usual. One of my favorite parts about doing these videos where I redraw something my husband drew is seeing my husband make art. There's something just so pure and simple about the art process when he is drawing. He just grabs colors and starts using them, and it feels like there's such a freeness to the process. Compared to when I work, I feel like there's so much technical stuff that goes into it. I feel the need to test a color like 3 different times before deciding it's the color I want to use. Or I need to pre-swatch all my colors and find all the perfect hues that go together to make smooth shading. I understand all of this is kind of needed. By doing this prep work, I am more prepared and the process goes smoother. I am also more likely to get a result that I want. But even still, I admire that freeness that Josh has when he makes art. At this point in the art process, I had been working with greens for a good while, so I was very excited to switch colors. I filled the top lip in with a deep red, and then on the bottom lip I used a combo of pink and a slightly lighter red than what I used on the top lip. I blended the 2 colors together to kind of add a shininess to the lower lip. The eyes are very different from my usual style, but I was still very excited to work on them. My goal was to make them look shiny, kind of like a disco ball. So I actually studied some disco balls before working on the eyes. When adding the different reds, I was trying my best to not make a pattern. I had about 6 colors ranging from pink to a very dark red that I was switching between. To make the eyes look shiny, I made sure to keep some of the squares on the left upper sides of the eye very bright. I would even go in with a lighter color marker to lighten the colors a bit. That is an interesting technique for alcohol-based markers that I don't talk about super often. If you want to lighten an area a bit, you can use a lighter color over a darker color, and the lighter color will lighten the spot where you color. The result can kind of vary, and sometimes you get a color that you weren't expecting, so I recommend doing some tests on a separate piece of paper before attempting it on your piece, because yeah, the results can be very surprising sometimes. For the jewels of the necklace, I did a kind of similar process. I just dabbed in some different shades of blue to make them look shiny. Like the eyes, these were also very fun. I just really like rendering shiny things. I had to be very careful when filling in the necklace. The details were pretty small, so I was trying my best to not go outside of the small areas. For the kimono, I decided to fill it in with different reds that I used for the eyes. I don't have much to say for this part, it's just more filling in colors and more blending, so we're going to keep moving. For the finishing details, I darkened the eyelash area around the eyes. My plan was to do this with color pencil, but I was worried it wouldn't get quite dark enough. So I'm going to very carefully use the marker first, and I'll darken and tighten things up a bit more with pencil later. Speaking of pencil, that's what I'm doing next actually. I just went around with different colors and added a darker outline to areas to help define them. Sometimes I don't like using the color pencil because when I scan in the pictures, I have to edit out like random color pencil dust that gets everywhere. So sometimes it's a little bit annoying. So sometimes I like to use fine liners a bit more since they're a bit cleaner. But I also have a harder time controlling fine liners a lot of times. So that's why I kind of still prefer the color pencil. It's a little bit more forgiving and a little bit easier to control. And like with the last piece, I drew a circle and filled it in with a base color. I kept going back and forth on the blue color I chose. I felt like it was a good hue that matches the necklace, but I do wish it was a bit lighter in value. It feels a bit similar to the character, but it's the lightest blue I had, but I still feel like it looks nice. And now both pictures are done, and so we can show them to my husband. I'm always a bit nervous and excited to show him the results. But let's see what he thinks. So, I now have my husband here with me.
Hello.
And he's gonna look at the pictures.
I'm excited and a little scared. I don't feel like I gave you easy tasks. So
here you go.
Here we are. Oh my goodness, that is wonderful. He's very younger than I was anticipating, but I also still kind of like it. But he looks good.
Oh, thank you.
I say you did a fine job. Like the little water droplet in the hair. Perfect, like, little accent off to the side.
I tried to give him more cloud features to balance.
He did give out the cloud features, just like I said his nose is a cloud. You did very well from what I, again, gave you not much. So, now for the scarier one. Oh, wow. That's, like, really cool. Like, on a lot of levels. I love it.
Yay.
But, like, it like fits, but also matches, but it's like better in every way. It's kind of cool. I like the way the eyes kind of work into like a regular eye, but they're still a bug eye.
Yeah, I'd
But
never
they're, like-
done that before.
They're like dazzling. Almost look like, I don't know.
Yeah, I was looking at disco balls.
I say they look like disco balls. That's kind of, yeah, the mindset. Oh, that's awesome.
Well, thank you.
You did wonderful.
They were definitely a challenge outside my comfort zone.
I'm glad to be of assistance in pushing you outside of your norm.
It was definitely fun trying to interpret my husband's designs in my own way, and I hope you enjoyed watching the process. Before we end, I want to thank my wonderful YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!